G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
Ahead of the G7 summit, the US and Italian leaders call for the G8 to be reinstated, with Russia returned to the group of leading industrial nations. But there's also talk of a G6 too, as the French president suggests kicking out the US.
Maybe the American president doesn't mind being isolated today, but we also don't mind being six if need be.
Also to come this hour, the Red Cross pulls 71 workers out of war-torn Yemen over security risks. The humanitarian group says its activity in the country has been blocked, threatened and directly targeted. And Israeli security forces fire tear gas at thousands of Palestinians in the 11th week of protests at the Gaza border. Hello, welcome. It's just gone 5 p.m. here in Moscow. You're watching RT International. Now, our top story this hour, Italy's new Prime Minister has joined the US President in calling for the G7 to reinstate Russia as a member of the group of leading industrial nations. Donald Trump made the statement before leaving the White House for the G7 summit in Canada.
The G7, which used to be the G8, they threw Russia out. They should let Russia come back in, because we should have Russia at the negotiating table.
OK, let's get more details now from RT's Donald Corter. He's in the studio with us. Donald, quite a statement and quite unexpected too.
It absolutely was unexpected. It came just as Trump was preparing to fly to Canada for the G7 summit. Now, let's talk about why Russia was excluded in the first place. This happened after 2014 with the referendum in Crimea, where the vast majority of people there voted to be part of Russia. Now, Western powers interpreted this as an annexation by Russia, an act of hostility, and they used this to justify pushing Russia out of what then was the G8. Putin's spokesperson has already reacted to Trump's statement. He said that Moscow's focusing on other formats. Even Putin's had long stated back when Russia was in the G8 that it was turning into an exclusive club, that it no longer represented the interests of world powers.
Concerning our relations with the G7, we do not have any relationship with them. When we worked in this format, we participated in the adoption of the final document, which are not binding, by the way. I thought this had some kind of sense, because we represent an alternative point of view. But our partners have decided they do not need this point of view. Actually, it's not an organisation, rather a club of interests.
And here's a brand new development. Italy's new Eurosceptic prime minister has echoed Trump's comment. He said that he agrees with Trump. He also said that Russia coming back to the G8 is in everyone's interest.
We shouldn't forget also, Don, that Trump has made this statement while tensions are running quite high, aren't they, between America and other G7 members?
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be definitely a tough gig for Trump himself. I mean, after he imposed these hefty steel and aluminum tariffs on his European allies and Canada, the leaders there were absolutely furious. I mean, even some leaders began to question whether the group should be further stripped down to G6.
Maybe the American president doesn't mind being isolated today, but we also don't mind being six if need be.
The G7's June summit seems already destined for dysfunction, with a heap of complaints from the U.S.'s European allies. Some are suggesting a name change to keep up with the times.
We should have been united during that G7 to tackle the global challenges of the world. And instead of that, we will be divided. It will not be a G7. It will be a G6 plus 1.
It's not too hard to see where the fallout between Washington and the rest of the pack is coming from. In just 2 years, Donald Trump has caused serious problems for major international agreements. First by announcing he was ditching the Paris Climate Accord. Then the Iran nuclear agreement, the breakthrough deal which took years to negotiate. And now, he's unleashed a trade war with the EU by slapping tariffs on their steel and aluminum.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. The United States will withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord. The United States has been taken advantage of by other countries, both friendly and not so friendly, for many, many decades. I'm here to protect, and one of the reasons I was elected is I'm protecting our workers, I'm protecting our companies.
Even Angela Merkel, who's known for maintaining her cool during the worst diplomatic spats, has had some strong words to share about the U.S.'s recent exits.
It is clear that, especially with the exit of the U.S. from the climate deal, there is dissent within the G7. Just as much as with the announcement of tariffs on aluminium and steel, which we believe are illegal, and also the issue of the Iranian nuclear deal, which the U.S. has withdrawn from.
Moreover, Merkel warned this lack of compromise may lead to the G7 failing to issue a joint statement. That would make this year's summit in Toronto the first ever to end without a communiqué. And chances are high it will, with the French President Emmanuel Macron also rumored to be unwilling to sign a joint paper with Trump, unless he makes some concessions and makes an effort to mend all the multilateral deals he's junked, which Trump most likely will not. Actually, according to his economic advisor, this row is no big deal at all.
There may be disagreements. I regard this as much like a family quarrel. We will do what is necessary to protect the United States, its businesses, and its workforce. Don't blame Trump. Blame the nations that have broken away from those conditions.
Blame the other countries. Now, that's what you want to hear right before a G7 summit. Donald Corder, RT.
Well, some do believe that the obvious tension at the summit will not be productive. Here's the former US presidential candidate, Ron Paul.
And maybe they think Trump will back down, which he might. You know, a lot of times, look how hostile he was to North Korea, and all of a sudden, you know, his tune changed. Right now, he might be just maneuvering. They're betting on that, and he has done that on foreign policy. But there are certain things that he does not back down on. For instance, he campaigned on, and he did not back down on Iran, and that's why we're moving in this direction. So maybe he'll stick to his guns on these tariffs. And I think it'll be interesting and worth watching over this weekend, but I just don't think anything real positive's coming up, because I don't think they talk about the real problems that cause our climate of hostility in trading and coming up with this. But there are certain things that he does not back down on. For instance, he campaigned on, and he did not back down on Iran, and that's why we're moving in this direction. So maybe he'll stick to his guns on these tariffs, but they're punishing us, the American taxpayer, the American consumer, and he's punishing our allies. So it really doesn't make any sense. When the Europeans spoke out after Trump took us out of the nuclear agreement with Iran, I thought, well, the Europeans will stand up to it. This is business.
Now, Vladimir Putin is in China at the moment on a state visit where he's already met with President Xi Jinping. The two leaders issued a joint statement on regional security and cooperation. The meeting comes as Washington ramps up the pressure on both countries, branding them adversaries. RT's Daniel Hawkins sent this report from Beijing.
Numerous issues to discuss on the two leaders' agenda, and numerous contracts and cooperation agreements signed by the finance, investment and commercial ministers of both countries, as well as officials, ranging from energy supplies, with the Russians agreeing to build parts of a nuclear reactor in China, to even space exploration, something, according to Mr. Putin, quite unprecedented in the country's external affairs. This was cemented by the leaders' close personal relationship, something both were keen to advertise, with Putin stating he'd even spent one of his recent birthdays with his Chinese counterpart. The crisis on the Korean peninsula was another key topic, of course, given both countries' proximity to North Korea and the upcoming summit between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, with both leaders stating they had a clear roadmap to a peaceful and stable peninsula.
We discussed the situation on the Korean peninsula. Russia and China are interested in peace and stability on the Korean peninsula and in Northeast Asia. It's pleasing to see that the inter-Korean talks are being conducted within the framework of the crisis solution roadmap proposed by Russia and China. Recent contacts between Russia and the North Korean confirm Pyongyang's aspirations for constructive work.
The Iran nuclear deal and ongoing conflict in Syria were another two topics up for discussion, with both leaders stating their views coincided on how to go about resolving them, namely making every effort to keep the Iran nuclear deal alive and maintain a stable government in Syria to avoid further escalation in that conflict. Both leaders will now head to Qingdao for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. We'll bring you full updates as and when we get there as well.
Now, the Red Cross has evacuated scores of its workers from Yemen amid concerns for their safety.
Our current activities have been blocked, threatened and directly targeted in recent weeks, and we see a vigorous attempt to instrumentalise our organisation as a pawn in the conflict.
Yemen's civil war between Houthi rebels loyal to the previous government and army forces backed by a Saudi-led coalition has torn the country apart over the past 3 years. According to the UN, thousands of children have been killed or injured, with millions displaced and even more in need of humanitarian assistance. In fact, it has been described as the worst man-made humanitarian crisis in modern history. The Saudi-led coalition, which has been conducting a bombing campaign in the country, says it always seeks to protect civilians and aid organisations working in the country. But a spokesperson for the Red Cross in Yemen says that such measures are simply not working.
We have seen a serious degradation of the security, and then we have felt also that somehow this collective responsibility of all the parties to the conflict to ensure the security of humanitarian workers has let us down. We had a colleague that was brutally murdered less than 2 months ago in Taiz when he was coming out of a detention visit. This is not acceptable, and there's a point where this has to stop, and there's a point where all the parties to this conflict have to take up their collective responsibility to protect the humanitarian workers, but also to protect the Yemeni civilians that are caught in between. When we say that the International Committee of the Red Cross, an institution that has an extensive experience working in front lines, is having to relocate its staff, that just shows how bad the situation is. If it's this bad for us, you can imagine how bad it is for Yemenis also today.
In other news this afternoon, Israeli security forces have fired tear gas on thousands of Palestinians at the Gaza border. At least 123 Palestinians have been killed and 14,000 have been injured. Protesters have gathered for 11 consecutive weeks to demand that Israel return the lands Palestinians do consider theirs. However, Israel disagrees. Gaza-based reporter Hind Kadari reports now from the ground.
Today, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are participating in million-man march, and they started this march on the 30th of March, where at least 123 Palestinians have been killed, 14,000 have been injured by live ammunition, and most of them are now with lifelong disabilities. The Israeli forces continue the violence and aggression against the Palestinian protesters, and Palestinian protesters stated that they will not stop protesting until they achieve their demand and until the siege that has been imposed on the Gaza Strip is removed. This Palestinian protester was shot right now in his leg, and this is the first injury of the 11th week of protesting of the Great March of Return. Today is supposed to be a very, very hard day where people are expecting more violence and more, as you see, tear gas is being fired on the Palestinian protesters, and you see how intensively they're firing the tear gas. And this is a Palestinian female that was also injured by tear gas, and it's very obvious that she was suffocating from the tear gas that has been thrown on the Palestinian protesters just right now. More Israeli forces and more Israeli snipers heavily stationed along the fence, and we are now 200 meters away only from the fence, and we can see the Israeli soldiers and Israeli snipers heavily stationed on piles of sand along the fence that separates Gaza Strip with Israel. Tensions are running high, and the Israeli forces continue to use tear gas canisters against the Palestinian protesters.
That was local journalist Hind Kadari there on the Gaza border. Now, still to come this hour, a website containing the DNA tests of millions of people has been hacked. We'll have a look at the details just after the break.
The events of April 28, 1996 in the historic town of Port Arthur, Tasmania. forever changed the course of history here in Australia.
The 35 souls lost their lives to a gunman's madness.
The massacre was the catalyst for the Australian government to enact massive and sweeping changes to their laws regarding the ownership, buying, and selling of firearms.
Maybe it's time for the United States to start looking outward for help.
Most people think to stand out in this business, you need to be the first one on top of the story, or the person with the loudest voice, or the biggest ratings. In truth, to stand out in the news business, you just need to ask the right questions and demand the right answers. Question more.
Hello again. Now, a nursery rhyme at a kindergarten in Massachusetts has provoked shock from parents as the words are all about surviving a mass shooting. Those who run the school, though, have defended the move, saying it's just the world we live in. With more details, here's Amerika.
Imagine picking up your 5-year-old from kindergarten and seeing a strange nursery rhyme taped to the wall. A reworked version of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with ominous lyrics.
Lock down, lock the door. Shut the lights off, say no more. Go behind the desk and hide. Wait until it's safe inside. Lock down, it's all done. Now it's time to have some fun.
That picture was posted by a Massachusetts mom who was taken aback when she learned her daughter had been doing active shooter drills as part of her pre-kindergarten program. But she's not the only one. Another mom had a similar experience.
My girls were playing teacher this past weekend. They had math time, snack time, a reading nook, and practiced their active shooter drill.
Earlier this week, a class of 8th graders in Pennsylvania were given bulletproof shields for their backpacks. A local sportswear company thought it would be a perfect gift for middle school graduation. The company's CEO, who happens to have a daughter at that school, gifted shields to all of her classmates and an extra 25 to the school.
Now there's a defensive measure parents and kids can take to ward off injury and improve chances of student survival.
In the time of need, the student can put it on this way. The student can hold it up to protect their face.
Although perhaps it's worth noting bulletproof shields don't provide protection against assault weapons, which have been most commonly used in mass shootings. But the company won plenty of publicity with such an unconventional graduation gift. And there are also those who try to make money off the mass shootings theme. Last month, a video game designed to simulate a school shooting sparked major public outrage, and it was removed from a distributing platform. It offered users an opportunity to play as either the killer or a SWAT officer trying to catch the gunman. Parents were outraged, and why wouldn't they be? This year alone, the country has seen 23 school shootings where someone was either injured or killed. That averages one such incident every single week so far. So perhaps it's not so surprising that mass shootings are making it to video games and active shooter drills, to schools and even kindergarten. Samira Khan, RT, Washington, D.C.
Now, millions of accounts have been hacked at the family tree website MyHeritage. The breach has raised concerns too about security, something the company has previously prided itself on. Well, the company lets users identify their family trees and search for relatives, and 96 million people have so far signed up for its services. When the breach was discovered, the company contacted its users and also offered them support. The company says only email and password data was compromised in the attack and insists too that any DNA information does remain safe as it is stored on separate systems with additional firewalls.
There has been no evidence that the data in the file was ever used by the perpetrators. We believe the intrusion is limited to user email addresses. We have no reason to believe that any other MyHeritage systems were compromised.
Well, the company now says it has boosted its security. Internet law expert Yair Cohen explains how personal data leaks do put users at risk.
The risk, of course, is that the data will find its place into insurance companies' hands, where a decision will be made on the basis of the information contained in the data. But the wider implication, I think, is legislation similar to money laundering legislations, but that would be data laundering legislations. And those legislations, those laws will ensure that any organization that uses data that affects individuals is actually able to track back the source of the data.
An additional 100,000 World Cup tickets are up for grabs today. They go on sale at the FIFA website at 8 p.m. GMT. Meanwhile, with less than a week to go before the tournament does kick off, national teams have begun arriving here in Russia. Spain and Panama here are among the latest, looking very smart too. The opening game is on June the 14th between Russia and Saudi Arabia at the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow. Well, the Stan Collymore Show has been exploring all things football ahead of the tournament, and this week he looks at the Street Child campaign, a movement that helps children from developing countries get involved in the beautiful game.
The Street Child World Cup takes disadvantaged children from across the world: Russia, England, the United States, Uzbekistan and Pakistan. It's the third World Cup. The first was in South Africa, the second in Brazil. World Cup legend Gilberto Silva is one of the supporters. Let's watch the tournament take place here at the Locomotive Arena.
We're up in the stands. We've got Team India giving lots of passionate support to their country. Team India, take it away.
This is the prize for the Street Child World Cup winners. The girls and the boys fighting for this fantastic trophy, and they'll go home as world champions.
I'm involved with Street Child for quite a long time, you know. Last time when they were in Brazil, I was there for the first time. And since then it was so difficult to get away from them, because, you know, it's so much passion here from what they do for these kids. It's amazing the way they work. I feel proud to be here, and very familiar for me in this kind of environment, you know, because look at my background and join them here is something I feel very close.
Just the fact that they're able to play football in their own community is good. It's safe for them with what we've set up there. But to be able to come over here and take part in this competition, it's a wonderful competition. The girls are meeting people from all over the world, and then they take that experience, they go back to Rio, they go back to their community, and they say, hey guys, there's a world out there, and there's other people like us all over the world, and they've got potential just like us.
Tell us how you feel. You've won the World Cup.
Wow, I feel so proud of them and so happy, so happy.
It's incredible. So the Brazilian girls have won the World Street Child Cup. Is this a good omen for Brazil? We'll see.
You're watching RT. Thanks for your company this afternoon. It's just coming up to 5:30 here in Moscow. We'll have more news for you at the top of the hour.